When my son told me I was becoming a burden and needed to accept reality, I smiled and nodded like the accommodating mother I'd always been. 3 weeks later, I was sitting across from a forensic accountant, discovering that my supposedly devoted family had been playing a game of financial chess where I was never meant to be anything but a pawn. If you're listening to this story, buckle up, because what happened next proves that sometimes the quietest players make the most devastating moves. Let me tell you how I went from discarded widow to the woman holding all the cards. Because, honey, this tale has more surprises than a magician's convention, and every twist reveals just how deep family betrayal can run. 6 months ago, I was Cordelia Blackstone, devoted wife of 38 years and mother to 2 children who saw me as little more than domestic help with a heartbeat. My life had been carefully constructed around other people's needs, other people's dreams, other people's definitions of who I should be. I met Bartholomew when I was 25, working as a secretary at his consulting firm. He was 31, ambitious, and completely confident about his place in the world. I was impressed by his certainty, his 5-year plans, his ability to see exactly how our life together would unfold. What I didn't realize then was that his vision of our future had very little room for my own dreams and aspirations. We married after an 8-month courtship that felt more like a job interview than a romance. Bartholomew had specific ideas about what kind of wife would support his career ambitions. I needed to be well educated enough to hold intelligent conversations at business dinners, but not so career focused that I'd compete with his professional priorities. I should be attractive and well dressed, but not so striking that I'd overshadow him at company events. Most importantly, I needed to understand that his success was our success, and everything else was secondary. I quit my job 2 weeks before our wedding. We won't need 2 incomes once I make partner, Bartholomew explained, already planning my retirement from any independent financial identity. Besides, managing our household properly is going to be a full-time job. He wasn't wrong about that. Bartholomew's idea of proper household management was incredibly detailed. He wanted dinner parties that impressed his colleagues, a home that showcased his success, and a wife who could seamlessly handle every social and domestic responsibility without making it look like work. I became an expert at creating the illusion of effortless perfection. Our first child, Caspian, arrived 2 years after our wedding. From the moment he was born, it was clear that he would be Bartholomew's heir apparent in every possible way. While I was recovering from a difficult labor, Bartholomew was already talking about private schools, college prep programs, and the family business Caspian would someday inherit. He's going to have every advantage, Bartholomew would tell anyone who'd listen, holding our infant son like he was displaying a trophy. The best education, the right connections, proper preparation for leadership. I loved Caspian fiercely, but I quickly learned that my role in his upbringing was to be the nurturing background figure, while Bartholomew shaped his character and ambitions. When Caspian showed interest in sports, Bartholomew enrolled him in elite programs and spent weekends at tournaments. When he excelled academically, Bartholomew hired private tutors and began networking with admissions officers at Ivy League schools. My job was to pack the lunches, wash the uniforms, and make sure Caspian was properly fed and rested for whatever achievement Bartholomew was orchestrating next. Ophelia arrived 3 years later, and while Bartholomew was pleased to have a daughter, his investment in her development was notably different. He wanted her to be accomplished and intelligent, but within limits that wouldn't threaten traditional gender roles. She could excel academically, but not in ways that might make her intimidating to future husbands. She could be ambitious, but her ambitions should complement rather than compete with family expectations. I found myself caught between wanting both children to reach their full potential and maintaining the family harmony that Bartholomew considered essential. Anytime I suggested that maybe Ophelia should be encouraged to pursue her interest in engineering, or that Caspian might benefit from learning some domestic skills, Bartholomew would remind me that children needed clear guidance, not confusion about their roles in life. Cordelia, You mean well, but you don't understand the competitive pressures they'll face, he'd say. Not unkindly, but with absolute finality. I'm preparing them for the real world. Your job is to provide the emotional support that makes their achievements possible. For 20 years, I threw myself into being the best possible emotional support system. I attended every school event, organized every birthday party, managed every crisis, and celebrated every achievement. I became an expert at anticipating everyone's needs and meeting them before they were even expressed. The irony was that I was actually quite good at the organizational and strategic thinking that went into managing our complex family life. I could coordinate multiple schedules, manage budgets, negotiate with vendors, and solve problems that would have challenged many professional managers. But because these skills were applied to domestic rather than business contexts, they were invisible to everyone, including myself. When the children went to college, I experienced what many women my age face: the sudden realization that my primary identity had been built around other people's needs, and now those people didn't need me anymore. Bartholomew was at the peak of his career, traveling frequently and working long hours. Caspian was at Harvard, completely absorbed in his studies and social life. Ophelia was at Stanford, discovering her independence and rarely calling home. For the first time in decades, I had time to think about what I wanted, what interested me, what dreams I might have set aside. The problem was, I could barely remember who I'd been before I became Bartholomew's wife and the children's mother. I started small. I enrolled in a continuing education art class at the local community college. I'd always loved drawing, but it had been years since I'd picked up a pencil for anything other than writing grocery lists. The instructor, a patient woman in her 50s named Elena, encouraged me to experiment with different techniques and subjects. "You have a natural eye for composition," she told me after I'd been attending classes for a month. "Have you ever considered taking this more seriously?" The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Taking art seriously would mean carving out time and space for my own interests, something I hadn't done in decades. It would mean asserting that my creative development mattered as much as Bartholomew's business dinners or the children's academic achievements. When I mentioned my art classes to Bartholomew, his response was exactly what I'd expected. "That's nice, dear. It's good for you to have hobbies now that you have more free time." Hobbies. Not interests, not talents, not potential career development. Hobbies. But I continued with the classes anyway, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to create something purely for my own satisfaction. Elena became not just an instructor, but a friend, someone who saw potential in me that I'd forgotten existed. "Cordelia, you could easily handle more advanced coursework," she suggested one evening as we cleaned up after class. "There's a wonderful program at the university for adult students. You can even work toward a degree in fine arts." A degree. At my age. The idea seemed both impossible and irresistible. When I brought up the possibility to Bartholomew, his reaction was more dismissive than I'd anticipated. "Cordelia, what would be the point? You're not planning to become a professional artist at this stage of your life. These classes are fine for keeping you busy, but a formal degree program seems excessive." Excessive. My desire to challenge myself intellectually and creatively was excessive. "Besides," he continued, "I'm going to need more help with entertaining as my business expands. The Peterson account is going to require a lot of cultivation, and Martha Peterson specifically mentioned how much she enjoyed our last dinner party. This isn't the time for you to be distracted by academic pursuits." And just like that, my artistic aspirations were relegated back to the category of pleasant distractions from my real responsibilities. The children's attitude toward my interests was similarly dismissive, though they expressed it differently. Caspian thought my art classes were cute and would occasionally ask to see my work with the patronizing interest of an adult humoring a child's hobby. Ophelia was supportive in principle, but clearly didn't consider my creative development to be particularly important compared to her own career advancement or social life. "It's great that you're keeping busy, Mom," she'd say during our weekly phone calls. "It must be nice to have something to do now that Dad's traveling so much." Something to do, as if my entire existence was simply about filling time between other people's important activities. But I persisted with the art classes, and eventually began to create work that surprised even me. Elena entered one of my paintings in a regional competition, and it won second place in the amateur division. The recognition was modest, but it meant everything to me. "I'm proud of you, Cordelia," Elena said when we celebrated with coffee after the award ceremony. "You've grown so much as an artist, but more importantly, you've grown as a person. You're remembering who you are underneath all those roles you've been playing." When I told Bartholomew about the award, his response was predictable. "That's nice, dear. Make sure you mention it to the Petersons at dinner next week. Martha might enjoy hearing about your little artistic success." My little artistic success. An achievement that had taken months of work and represented a significant personal milestone, was reduced to cocktail party conversation. As the years passed, this pattern repeated itself in various forms. Any interest or achievement of mine was valuable only insofar as it reflected well on Bartholomew or contributed to his social and business objectives. I was encouraged to be accomplished, but only within the narrow boundaries of what enhanced rather than competed with his identity as the successful head of household. The children absorbed these dynamics completely. As they entered their professional careers, they began to treat me with the same benevolent condescension they'd learned from their father. My opinions were solicited politely, then ignored. My concerns were acknowledged briefly, then dismissed. My achievements were praised faintly, then forgotten. When Bartholomew started having heart problems 5 years ago, I threw myself into researching his condition, coordinating his medical care, and modifying our lifestyle to support his recovery. I became an expert on cardiac nutrition, learned to monitor his medications, and reorganized our entire household around his health needs. The cardiologist was impressed with my thoroughness and attention to detail. "Mrs. Blackstone, your husband is lucky to have such a dedicated advocate," Dr. Richardson told me after one particularly complex consultation. "Your preparation and follow-through are exceptional. Have you ever considered a career in healthcare?" The suggestion was both flattering and absurd. At 66, with no formal medical training, the idea of starting a healthcare career was impractical. But the comment stayed with me because it was one of the few times anyone had suggested that my skills and intelligence might have professional value. During Bartholomew's recovery, I found myself managing not just his health, but increasingly large portions of his business affairs. He would be too tired to handle certain calls or meetings, so I'd take detailed messages and relay information. When he needed to review contracts or proposals while resting, I'd summarize the key points and highlight areas that needed his attention. What surprised me was how naturally this work came to me. I could quickly identify the essential elements of complex business documents, spot potential problems, and organize information in ways that made decision-making easier. I began to understand that many of the skills I'd developed managing our household were directly applicable to business management. But when I mentioned this observation to Bartholomew, he was quick to correct my misconceptions. "Cordelia, I appreciate your help during my recovery, but don't confuse clerical work with actual business management. Taking messages and organizing paperwork isn't the same as making strategic decisions or handling client relationships." Of course not. How could I have been so presumptuous? The final years of our marriage settled into a comfortable routine where I provided increasingly comprehensive support for Bartholomew's health and business needs, while my own interests and development remained secondary considerations. I continued with my art classes when possible, maintained friendships when they didn't conflict with family obligations, and occasionally wondered what my life might have looked like if I'd made different choices decades earlier. When Bartholomew died suddenly of a stroke at 69, I felt genuine grief mixed with something I didn't initially recognize: relief. Relief that I no longer had to coordinate my every decision around someone else's priorities. relief that I could eat what I wanted, watch what I wanted, and plan my days according to my own preferences. The release made me feel guilty. Bartholomew hadn't been cruel or abusive. He'd been a product of his generation and social class, with clearly defined ideas about marriage roles and family responsibilities. He'd provided well for our family, been faithful throughout our marriage, and shown me consideration within the boundaries of what he considered appropriate. But he'd never really seen me as a complete person with my own valid dreams and capabilities. To him, I was a supporting character in the story of his life, and I'd spent 38 years accepting that role without question. Now, suddenly, I was the main character in my own story, and I had no idea how to write the next chapter. The first sign that my newfound independence would be short-lived came during the funeral reception. I was accepting condolences from Bartholomew's business associates when I overheard Caspian and Serafina having what they clearly thought was a private conversation in the kitchen. "We need to move quickly," Serafina was saying, her lawyer voice in full effect. The longer she has to get used to managing everything herself, the harder it will be to convince her she needs help. "I know, but we have to be subtle about it," Caspian replied. "Mother's not stupid, just inexperienced. If we push too hard, too fast, she might get suspicious." Inexperienced. After watching me coordinate every aspect of their father's business and personal life during his illness, they still saw me as inexperienced. "The key is to focus on how overwhelming everything must be," Serafina continued. "Emphasize the complexity, the potential for costly mistakes, the burden of responsibility. Make her feel like accepting help is the caring thing to do for herself and the family." I stayed in the doorway, hidden by the angle of the wall, as they discussed their strategy for managing what they clearly saw as the problem of my independence. "What about Ophelia?" Caspian asked. "She'll go along with whatever we decide. She's too busy with her own life to get involved in the details, and she trusts us to handle family financial matters appropriately." Appropriately. They were planning to manipulate me out of my own inheritance, and they considered this appropriate family financial management. "The assisted living angle is perfect," Serafina said, and I felt my blood freeze. "Present it as luxury retirement. Emphasize the social aspects and lack of responsibility. By the time she realizes what's happening, the house will be sold and the assets will be properly managed." Properly managed. By them, of course. "How long do you think we need?" Caspian asked. 6 months, maybe less. Elderly people adapt to new situations quickly when they don't have alternatives. Once she's settled into the assisted living routine, she'll probably be grateful we took care of everything. I backed away from the kitchen before they could discover me eavesdropping, but their conversation had clarified everything I needed to know. My own son and daughter-in-law were planning to institutionalize me and steal my inheritance, and they thought I was too stupid and passive to stop them. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as Serafina had predicted. Caspian began visiting more frequently, always with helpful suggestions about how to handle various aspects of estate management. The suggestions invariably involved transferring responsibility to him or Serafina. "Mother, these investment portfolios are incredibly complex," he'd say, spreading financial documents across the dining room table like he was teaching a child to count. Father spent decades building these relationships with fund managers and financial advisors. Without his expertise, you could easily make decisions that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. "What kind of decisions?" I'd ask, genuinely curious about what specific risks he was imagining. "Well, for instance, you might not understand the tax implications of different withdrawal strategies. Or you might not recognize when market conditions require rebalancing the portfolio allocations. These aren't intuitive concepts, Mother. They require years of experience and professional training." The condescension was breathtaking. I'd been managing our household budget for 38 years, coordinating Bartholomew's business travel and handling increasingly complex medical and insurance issues during his illness. But apparently, these experiences had taught me nothing about financial decision-making. Serafina's approach was more sophisticated, but equally insulting. As a lawyer, she focused on legal complications and liability issues. Cordelia, I'm concerned about your exposure to potential lawsuits, she'd say, reviewing documents with the serious expression she probably used with her clients. Estate management involves significant legal responsibilities. If you make a mistake in handling Bartholomew's business obligations, you could be personally liable for damages. What kind of mistakes? I'd ask. Missing deadlines for required filings, failing to properly notify creditors, mishandling tax obligations. The penalties can be severe, and unfortunately, claiming ignorance isn't a valid legal defense. She was right about the complexity, but wrong about my capacity to handle it. With proper legal and financial advice, which I could easily afford, I was perfectly capable of learning what I needed to know. But she was counting on my intimidation rather than my education. The smart approach, she'd continue, is to transfer these responsibilities to someone with the appropriate expertise. Caspian has been working with financial advisors for years, and I can handle the legal aspects. That way, you're protected from potential liability while still maintaining ultimate oversight of your interests. Ultimate oversight. What a lovely way to describe being completely cut out of all decision-making, while technically remaining the legal owner of assets I'd never be allowed to access. The pressure campaign intensified as weeks passed. Every conversation with Caspian or Serafina included references to the burden I was carrying, the complexity I was facing, and the release I could experience if I just let them help. "You look tired, Mother," Caspian would say, studying my face with theatrical concern. "This stress isn't good for your health. Father wouldn't want you wearing yourself out trying to handle responsibilities he spent a lifetime learning to manage." And fine, Caspian, I'm actually finding some of this quite interesting. Interesting, maybe, but is it worth the risk? One mistake could jeopardize everything Father worked to build. Is your intellectual curiosity worth potentially losing the family legacy? The family legacy. My husband's life's work, which I'd supported and contributed to for nearly 4 decades, was being redefined as something I might destroy through my incompetence. Ophelia's contributions to this campaign were more subtle, but equally effective. During our weekly phone calls, she expressed concern about my well-being and gently reinforced her brother's suggestions. "Mom, I worry about you rattling around in that big house all by yourself. It must be lonely, and all that maintenance must be overwhelming. It's an adjustment, but I'm managing fine." "But do you really want to be managing? You've spent your whole adult life taking care of other people. Don't you deserve some time to relax and enjoy yourself?" Relaxation and enjoyment, in Ophelia's vision, apparently required giving up my home, my independence, and my financial autonomy. Caspian mentions some lovely retirement communities with wonderful amenities. It might be nice to be around people your own age, with activities and social opportunities, people my own age, as if being 71 meant I'd automatically have more in common with other 71-year-olds than with anyone else, regardless of our actual interests or personalities. The assisted living brochures started appearing during Caspian's 3rd week of intensive helping. He'd spread them across the coffee table like travel magazines, highlighting amenities and lifestyle benefits. "Look at this one, Mother. Willowbrook Manor has art classes, book clubs, even organized day trips to museums and theaters. You'd have a whole community of friends and activities without any of the responsibility of maintaining your own home." The facilities looked pleasant enough, but what struck me was how thoroughly they were designed to eliminate any need for independent decision-making. Meals were provided, activities were organized, social interactions were structured. It was essentially upscale institutionalization presented as luxury lifestyle enhancement. "The best part," Serafina added, "is that you'd have professional management of all your finances and legal affairs. No more worrying about investment decisions or tax obligations. No more stress about maintaining property or handling repairs. No more control over my own life," she meant. "I appreciate your concern," I told them, "but I'm not ready to make such a dramatic change yet. I'd like to spend some time learning to manage things myself before I decide whether I need that level of assistance. Caspian and Serafina exchanged the kind of look parents share when their toddler insists they can dress themselves. Of course, mother, there's no rush. We just want you to know that when you're ready for help, we're here to provide it. But their patience was clearly limited. The visits became more frequent, the pressure more intense, and the time frame more compressed. What had started as gentle suggestions about future possibilities became urgent warnings about immediate dangers. Mother, I've been reviewing Father's business obligations, and the situation is more complicated than we initially realized, Caspian announced, during one of his increasingly frequent visits. There are quarterly tax filings due next month, and several investment contracts that require renewal decisions within the next few weeks. Then I'll need to meet with the accountant and financial advisor to understand what needs to be done. That's not really practical. These decisions require months of preparation and analysis. There isn't time for you to develop the necessary expertise before the deadlines. This was the first I'd heard about any impending deadlines, which seems suspicious given that Bartholomew had always been meticulous about advance planning for financial obligations. What happens if I make the wrong decisions? I asked. Potentially catastrophic losses. Some of these investments have early withdrawal penalties that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Others have tax implications that could trigger audits or additional liabilities. Catastrophic losses, tax implications, audits. The language was designed to trigger anxiety rather than provide useful information. The responsible thing to do, Serafina interjected, is to transfer decision-making authority to someone who can act quickly and knowledgeably. As your son and a successful investment professional, Caspian is the obvious choice. Transfer decision-making authority. Such a clean, professional way to describe stealing someone's financial independence. I'd still want to be consulted about major decisions, I said. Of course, Caspian agreed. But you'd need to trust my expertise when time-sensitive situations arise. And honestly, Mother, consulting with you about every detail would defeat the purpose of having professional management. Professional management of my own money with consultation privileges that could be revoked whenever my son decided I didn't need to be involved. The final trap was set during what Caspian presented as a routine visit to review estate documents. He arrived with a briefcase full of papers and an air of urgent efficiency. Mother, we need to take care of some immediate paperwork. The bank requires updated signature authorizations, and the investment accounts need beneficiary information updated. The documents looked official and complicated, full of legal language that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. As I tried to read through them, Caspian provided helpful explanations that somehow made everything more confusing. This section just confirms that I have authority to act on your behalf when you're unavailable or unable to make decisions yourself, he explained, pointing to a paragraph dense with legalese. It's standard estate planning language. What constitutes being unable to make decisions? I asked. Oh, routine things like being out of town or in the hospital or just not wanting to be bothered with minor administrative details. It's purely for convenience. Convenience. Such a pleasant word for signing away my autonomy. And this section establishes me as the primary contact for all your financial accounts, he continued. That way, if there are any questions or problems, the banks and investment firms can reach someone immediately instead of having to track you down. Primary contact, another euphemism for cutting me out of my own financial management. I was about to ask more questions when Serafina arrived, ostensibly to witness my signatures. Cordelia, I'm so glad we're finally getting this organized, she said, settling at the dining room table with her own briefcase. These authorizations will make everything so much easier for you. Between Caspian's explanations and Serafina's encouragements, I found myself signing documents I didn't fully understand, authorizing changes I hadn't requested, and agreeing to arrangements that felt fundamentally wrong. But they were my family. They were intelligent, successful professionals who claimed to have my best interests at heart. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? The answer to that question would become clear sooner than I expected. 3 days after signing what I thought were routine estate documents, I discovered that my credit cards were being declined. At first, I assumed it was a simple mistake. Perhaps the bank needed updated information, or there was some administrative delay following Bartholomew's death. But when I called the customer service number, the representative's explanation was confusing and alarming. Mrs. Blackstone, according to our records, your account access has been restricted pending resolution of some estate-related issues. You'll need to speak with the primary account manager, Mr. Caspian Blackstone, to clarify your authorization status. Primary account manager, authorization status. I was being locked out of my own bank accounts, and my son was apparently the one with the keys. When I called Caspian, his explanation was smooth and reassuring. Oh, Mother, I'm sorry about the confusion. The bank implemented some new security protocols for estate accounts, and there was a temporary hold while they verified all the paperwork. It should be resolved by tomorrow. But why would they need to verify anything? These are my accounts. It's just a precaution. With Father's passing, they want to make sure all the estate-related transfers are handled properly. It's actually a good thing. It shows they're being careful with your assets. Something about his tone felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. I decided to give it another day before pursuing the matter further. The next morning, I tried my cards again. Still declined. This time, when I called the bank, I was transferred to a different department and spoke with a supervisor who seemed to have more complete information about my accounts. Mrs. Blackstone, I show that account management has been transferred to Mr. Caspian Blackstone as per the power of attorney documents filed on Tuesday. He's now the authorized signatory for all transactions above $500. Power of attorney. I hadn't signed any power of attorney documents, or had I? Those papers Caspian had brought over, with all the legal language and helpful explanations, had I unknowingly signed away control of my own finances? I'd like to review the documents you have on file, I said. Certainly. You can request copies through Mr. Blackstone's office, or you can visit any branch location with proper identification. Through Mr. Blackstone's office. I now needed my son's permission to see my own financial records. I hung up and immediately called Caspian again, this time with more specific questions about the documents I'd signed. Mother, those were just standard estate planning forms. Nothing has really changed. I just have the ability to help you with routine transactions when needed. The bank says you're now the authorized signatory for my accounts. That's just a technicality. It means I can handle things like bill payments and routine transfers without bothering you for every little detail. You still have full access to your money. Then why are my credit cards being declined? There was a pause that lasted just a fraction too long. That's probably related to the credit limit adjustments we discussed. The bank lowered the limits on your cards as part of their standard risk management for estate accounts. We hadn't discussed any credit limit adjustments. I was certain of that. Caspian, I want to see copies of everything I signed on Tuesday. Of course, Mother. I'll bring them by this evening so we can review everything together. Together, as if I needed his guidance to understand documents bearing my own signature. When Caspian arrived that evening, he was accompanied by Serafina and an air of patient concern that immediately put me on guard. Mother, you seem upset about the banking situation, he began, settling into what had been Bartholomew's favorite chair. I want to make sure you understand that everything we've done is designed to protect your interests. I want to understand exactly what I signed on Tuesday. Serafina opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Of course, Cordelia, it's important that you feel comfortable with all these arrangements. She spread the documents across the coffee table, and as I read through them more carefully than I had the first time, the scope of what I'd agreed to became horrifyingly clear. I hadn't just authorized Caspian to act on my behalf in emergencies. I'd given him comprehensive power of attorney over all my financial affairs. I designated him as the primary beneficiary of all accounts and investments. I'd even signed something that appeared to give him authority to make decisions about my living arrangements and medical care. These documents make you my legal guardian, I said, looking up at them in shock. Not guardian, exactly, Serafina corrected. More like a financial conservator with broad discretionary powers. It's designed to ensure that your affairs are managed competently while preserving your dignity and autonomy. Preserving my autonomy by taking it away completely. I don't remember agreeing to anything this comprehensive. Mother, you were understandably overwhelmed by all the legal language, Caspian said, his voice full of sympathetic understanding. That's exactly why these arrangements are necessary. Financial and legal documents are incredibly complex, and misunderstanding them can have serious consequences. I want to revoke these agreements. Caspian and Serafina exchanged a look that confirmed my worst fears. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Serafina said carefully. These documents include provisions designed to prevent revocation during periods of emotional distress or mental instability. Mental instability. They were suggesting that my desire to control my own finances was evidence of mental instability. Are you saying I'm mentally incompetent? Of course not, Caspian said quickly. But the law recognizes that grief can affect judgment, and these safeguards protect you from making decisions you might regret later. Protect me from making my own decisions by preventing me from making any decisions at all. How long do these arrangements last? Another exchange of glances. Indefinitely, Serafina said finally. Unless there's a significant change in circumstances that warrants review. Indefinitely. I had signed away my independence forever, and the people I'd trusted to protect my interests were the ones who'd engineered my imprisonment. That's when they delivered the final blow. Mother, we've made arrangements for you to move to Willowbrook Manor next week, Caspian announced. Given the complexity of your situation and your obvious stress about financial matters, we think a structured environment would be beneficial. I'm not moving to assisted living. The decision has already been made, Serafina said gently. As your financial conservator, Caspian has the authority to make living arrangement decisions based on what's best for your health and safety. The trap had been perfect. They'd manipulated me into signing documents I didn't understand, using those documents to seize control of my finances, and then using their financial control to justify institutionalizing me against my will. You planned this, I said. The full scope of their betrayal finally becoming clear. We plan to protect you from yourself, Caspian replied. Mother, you're 71 years old. You've never managed significant financial assets independently. You have no experience with investment decisions, tax planning, or estate management. Left to your own devices, you could lose everything father worked to build. So you decided to steal it instead. We decided to preserve it for the family. The house will be sold, the proceeds will be properly invested, and you'll receive a comfortable monthly allowance for your expenses at Willowbrook. An allowance from my own money controlled by my own son for living in an institution I never chose. And if I refuse? Serafina's professional mask slips slightly, revealing something colder underneath. Cordelia, you don't have the legal standing to refuse. These documents give Caspian comprehensive authority over your affairs. Fighting them would require expensive legal representation that you can't access without his approval. They had thought of everything. I was legally powerless, financially trapped, and about to be physically removed from my own home. The moving van arrived the following Tuesday at exactly 2 p.m., just as Serafina had promised. I watched from the front window as 2 uniformed men began loading my life into boxes and suitcases. 38 years of marriage reduced to what would fit in a 1-bedroom apartment at Willowbrook Manor. Caspian supervised the process with the detached efficiency of someone managing a business transaction. He'd already selected which possessions I'd be allowed to keep, which would be stored, and which would be donated. My art supplies were in the donation pile. You won't have space for those at Willowbrook, he explained when I protested. Besides, they have art programs there. You can participate in group activities instead of working alone. Group activities instead of personal expression. Scheduled creativity instead of independent exploration. As we drove away from what had been my life, I asked one final question. Why, Caspian? If you needed money, you could have asked. If you wanted the house, we could have discussed it. Why did you have to destroy me to get what you wanted? His answer revealed everything I needed to know about the man I'd raised. Because, Mother, asking would have given you the power to say no. This way, everyone gets what they need. You get care and security. I get the resources to build on Father's legacy. And the family wealth is preserved for future generations. Everyone gets what they need, except for what I needed: dignity, respect, and the right to make my own choices. But what Caspian didn't know was that I had one advantage he hadn't considered. 43 years of marriage to a meticulous man had taught me to pay attention to details. And Bartholomew's obsessive organization meant that somewhere in his files, there had to be records that would tell a different story than the one Caspian was presenting. As I settled into my sterile one-bedroom apartment at Willowbrook Manor, I smiled at the irony. Caspian thought he'd won by moving me to a place where I'd have no distractions, no responsibilities, and plenty of time to think. He was absolutely right about the time to think. He just had no idea what I'd be thinking about. The first thing I did was befriend Margaret, the head librarian. At 73, she was sharp as a tack and had spent 40 years as a paralegal before retiring. More importantly, she had unrestricted internet access and a deep suspicion of adult children who suddenly developed intense concern for their parents' welfare. "Honey," she said after I'd explained my situation, "you're not the first woman to walk through these doors with that particular story, but you might be the first one with the resources to do something about it." Within a week, I'd located the forensic accountant who'd helped Margaret's neighbor expose her grandson's embezzlement scheme. Dr. Patricia Vance was a former FBI financial crimes investigator who specialized in elder financial abuse. Her retainer was steep, but that's where Bartholomew's obsessive record-keeping became my salvation. You see, my darling husband had kept everything. Every receipt, every bank statement, every investment record, meticulously filed and organized. What Caspian didn't know was that Bartholomew had also maintained a safety deposit box that only I knew about, filled with backup records and his original will. The will that named me as sole executor and primary beneficiary, not the revised version Serafina had supposedly found among his papers. Vance's investigation revealed a conspiracy that went back months before Bartholomew's death. Medical records showed someone had been gradually increasing his heart medication, just enough to cause the mental confusion that would make him sign documents he might not fully understand. Serafina had been Bartholomew's lawyer for only 6 months, replacing our family attorney of 20 years after convincing him that estate planning required updated expertise. The fake will wasn't their only fabrication. The power of attorney documents I'd signed contained provisions that weren't legally valid. The financial transfers violated several federal banking laws, and Caspian's credentials as an investment professional were grossly exaggerated. He was actually a mid-level employee at a small firm who'd been embezzling client funds for 2 years. But here's what really stunned me. This wasn't their first attempt. Dr. Vance found evidence that they'd tried similar schemes with 2 of Serafina's other clients, both elderly widows who'd been convinced to sign over financial control to adult children. One case had been settled out of court, the other buried under legal technicalities. I was their third victim, but I wouldn't be their last success. The beauty of their plan was how perfectly it exploited society's assumptions about aging women. Who would believe that a 71-year-old widow could outwit 2 successful professionals? Who would take seriously the complaints of an elderly woman in assisted living who claimed her family was stealing from her? The answer, as it turned out, was the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, the state attorney general's office, and a federal judge who'd seen too many cases of elder financial abuse. 6 months after being declared incompetent to manage my own affairs, I was sitting in a federal courthouse watching my son and daughter-in-law being sentenced for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and embezzlement. The total amount they'd stolen was $2.3 million. but the systematic nature of their fraud elevated it to federal crime territory. Caspian got 12 years, Serafina got 15 plus disbarment and a lifetime ban from financial services. Ophelia's role was more complicated. She genuinely believed her brother was helping me, but she'd also never questioned why she was suddenly named as secondary beneficiary to assets she'd never expected to inherit. Her willful ignorance cost her the modest inheritance she would have received legitimately, but saved her from criminal charges. The day I moved back into my house, I found something interesting in Bartholomew's study. Hidden behind his diploma was a letter addressed to me, dated just 3 weeks before his death. "My dearest Cordelia," it read, "if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and you've discovered the safety deposit box. I've suspected for months that Caspian and Serafina were planning something. The medication changes, the new lawyer, the sudden interest in estate planning. None of it felt right. I couldn't prove anything, but I wanted to make sure you'd have the resources to fight if I was wrong to trust them. You've always been stronger and smarter than anyone gave you credit for, including me. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Use everything in the box. Show them what you really are. Your devoted husband, Bartholomew." He'd known. Maybe not the details, but he'd known something was wrong, and he'd prepared for the possibility that his family would betray the woman who'd devoted her life to them. I'm writing this story 2 years later from the sunroom of my house, the house I almost lost, in the life I almost had stolen from me. The easel in the corner holds my latest painting, a commission from a gallery in San Francisco that's representing my work. My art, it turns out, is more than just a hobby. The settlement from Caspian and Serafina's criminal conviction, combined with the civil judgment, means I'm actually wealthier now than when this whole nightmare began. But more importantly, I'm free. Free to make my own choices, free to pursue my own interests, and free to help other women who find themselves in similar situations. The Cordelia Blackstone Foundation for Elder Rights has helped 17 families expose financial abuse schemes in the past year. We work with law enforcement, provide legal resources, and maintain a network of investigators who specialize in these cases. Margaret runs our research division, Dr. Vance heads our investigative team, and Elena, remember Elena from my art classes, manages our victim support services. Ophelia visits occasionally. Our relationship is polite but distant. She's still processing the reality that her beloved brother was a criminal, and her devoted mother was much more capable than anyone had imagined. She's in therapy, trying to understand how she could have been so blind to what was happening. And as for me, I'm 73 now, and I've never felt more alive. I travel when I want to, create art that challenges me, run a foundation that makes a difference, and wake up every morning knowing that every choice I make is my own. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the years I lost, the dreams I deferred, the talents I left undeveloped while I played the role of devoted wife and mother. The answer is complicated. I'm angry about the betrayal, certainly, and the assumption that my age made me an easy target. But I'm not angry about the person I was before. She was doing the best she could with the options she thought she had. The woman I am now isn't a rejection of the woman I was then. She's the culmination of everything I learned, every skill I developed, every strength I discovered, while I thought I was just being helpful. Caspian and Serafina saw a vulnerable elderly woman who could be manipulated and discarded. What they actually found was a woman who had spent decades learning to read people, anticipate needs, manage complex situations, and solve problems under pressure. They thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They never realized they were facing a queen. And in the end, that made all the difference.